Hi everyone! Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of UCTV Alive for Kids. It's really good to have your company. I'm Dr. Louise Grimmer from the University of Tasmania, and this week's topic is really topical and really important, and it's about climate change. And I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Chloe Lucas and Dr. Gabi Mocatta to the program. Hi Chloe, hi Gabi.
Hello Louise.
Hi, Louise. Thanks so much for coming in. Chloe and Gabi are both from the University of Tasmania, and they're going to be presenting today about the project which is called Curious Climate Schools. Now, before we get into this wonderful project that you've both been running, which is all about questions and answers about climate change, I want to find out what got you so interested in the topic of climate change. So Chloe, we might go to you first. How did you become interested in climate change?
When I first came to Australia, I went diving on the Great Barrier Reef, and I absolutely fell in love with the fish and the corals and just the most magical world. And I was living there and working as a dive master when I really sort of started to witness coral bleaching and find out about the threat that climate change poses to the Great Barrier Reef. And that got me started on finding out about climate change and really wanting to work on that and work on communication around climate change particularly, and try to get action happening.
And Chloe, what do you do in your role at the University of Tasmania?
I'm a research fellow at the University of Tasmania in geography, and I particularly am interested in climate change communication. So I talk to people about why they're interested in climate change or not, and also around bushfire. So I look at bushfire adaptation and climate adaptation, so how we can live with the new kinds of threats that we have because of climate change.
Oh, so you're a perfect person to be running this project then. And Gabi, what about you? How did you become interested in climate change?
Well, Louise, I'm a journalist by profession, and now an academic that studies the media and journalism and the way we communicate about these kinds of big issues like climate change. I became really interested about how the conversations that we have about climate change in our media really broadly really strongly dictate people's understanding of an issue so important as this. So that was my entry into interest and concern about climate change and wanting to be part of the solution. So my role now at UTAS is working with the climate science group, and I'm their climate change communication research person, and we research the best ways to communicate climate change, what the media is doing, what they're doing right, what they're doing not so well, and how we can get these really important messages across as to how we can solve this issue by getting everyone to work together and to understand what the issue is. So we look at what's called climate literacy, making people aware of the problems with climate change and the solutions that we have to deal with it.
So this project is right up your alley as well. It's fantastic. Now this of course is really topical this week, isn't it? Because climate change is really in the media at the moment with what's going on overseas. So you've prepared a video about the project. Before we play the video for everyone, Chloe, can you just tell us, how did this project start?
Well, a couple of years ago, there was a project called Curious Climate Tasmania, and it was run by Greta Petzel, who I think you've had on this show. What they did was they went and asked adults all around Tasmania what the questions they wanted to ask about climate change, and they did a road trip around Tasmania. And we thought this was a fantastic idea to actually, go to people and say, well, what is it you want to know, and have experts answer directly. But we thought, well, there's a lot of kids with questions about climate change.
Yes.
And so we wanted to get that into schools. So last year we did a little pilot, and this year we've gone big.
Yep.
And we asked schools all over Tasmania what questions they wanted to ask, and we got teachers to brainstorm with their classes about the questions they really want to ask about climate change. And in classes, the students voted on their top 10 favourite, their most wanted questions.
Yep.
And then those classes sent in their questions to us. Some of them sent in great videos, some of them sent artwork, and some of them just sent text questions, which was also great. And we compiled all those questions and sent them out to 57 experts, mostly from UTAS, from University of Tasmania, but also from CSIRO. We had people from University of Adelaide and Massey University, and even we had a question about pangolins. We didn't have any pangolin experts, so we went out on Twitter and we managed to find a pangolin expert from the Academy of Sciences in China.
Wow! Oh, it's wonderful. Well, look, should we watch the video? So what we've got for you today, everyone, and some of you who are watching, you may well have sent in some of the questions to this project. So we're going to play you a video that shows some of the questions that have come in from from students and some of the answers from some of the experts. And then we'll come back here and we'll have a 5-minute break for you to think about your climate change questions for Gabi and Chloe today. So we'll go to the video now.
Young people have a lot of questions about our changing climate. We think they deserve answers.
For Curious Climate Schools, more than 1,000 school students from around Tasmania worked with their classes to send in their top 273 questions about climate change. Students had some great questions like these.
I was wondering if more natural disasters are going to occur due to climate change.
Is farming in Tasmania sustainable, and how has climate change impacted agriculture?
Is it too late to stop climate change?
Is it possible to reverse the damage caused by climate change?
How will climate change affect our lives?
How will climate change impact the wildlife?
What will the Earth be like when I'm an adult?
Wow, these are some big questions here.
Thank you for this question. It's one that's really close to my heart.
Great question.
I love questions like this.
The answer to that question is unequivocally yes.
We got together 57 experts to answer them, from climate scientists to conservation scientists, pyrogeographers, chemists, law experts, social scientists, engineers, psychologists, oceanographers and paleoclimatologists, even Indigenous knowledge experts and health scientists. Some of the questions asked about whether climate change is real, or how much the climate is changing, and some asked about the impacts that we're seeing in the natural world. Here's what some of our experts had to say.
Well, guys, I'm afraid it is happening and it's our fault.
In the last 10 years, most of the warming that we've seen over the entire historical period has happened over this last little period. And that's what we always expected to happen, a real ramping up as we go into the future.
Climate change and sea level rise are already affecting our wetlands. It's happening now in a wetland near you, and it's been happening for years.
Well, we know that actually some of the colder places on Earth are warming faster than other places on the Earth. So the Arctic, for instance, in the North Pole, is warming at about 3 times faster than the rest of the planet on average.
Climate change will bring on more extreme circumstances in all kinds of different forms. This can mean heat waves, bushfires, cold snaps, snowstorms, typhoons, hurricanes, huge rainfalls, and many other things.
We also got some questions that really got our experts thinking, like these.
The question is, are electric cars good if they get charged by coal-powered electricity? And this is an excellent question because an electric car, which I've got one of in my screen behind me, they're really good. They produce no carbon dioxide emissions and no global warming effect when they're being driven if the electricity that was put into them came from zero emissions or renewable electricity. If that electricity came from a coal-fired power plant, like the ones that are in Victoria, for example, that send electricity across the cable to Tasmania sometimes, then actually the emissions are quite high. And I've calculated that for an average electric vehicle that's being charged up from coal-powered electricity in Victoria, for example, the emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions, are about 25% less than an average petrol vehicle that you might drive around. So yes, they are better, but only by a small amount. And so the key message from that is electric vehicles are great if you produce new renewable electricity. And so you've got to do that at the same time as you replace petrol vehicles with electric vehicles. Thanks, Margate Primary. That was an excellent question. Go the Polar Bears.
Do you like to travel or have friends or family who fly regularly? If so, you probably have a strong sense that travel changed significantly due to the pandemic and has had some kind of impact on climate change. Through a combination of lockdowns, border closures, and people not wanting to risk catching COVID-19, commercial flights experienced more than 8 million less flights in 2020. You can even see the difference in air traffic before and during the pandemic. More than a year later, commercial flights are still down significantly compared to beforehand, meaning COVID-19 continues to reduce people's likelihood to travel. Now, to determine how fewer flights relates to climate change, let's look at global CO2 emissions. Added CO2 in the atmosphere is the main source driving climate change. The more we add, the more the climate will change. In 2020, we added 2.4 gigatons of CO2 less than in 2019, the largest ever recorded drop in a single year. But what's a gigaton of CO2? 1 gigaton is 1 billion tons, which is roughly 200 million elephants. So that's roughly 480 million fewer elephants worth of CO2 in the atmosphere. However, in the beginning of 2021, we have already seen a huge spike in CO2 emissions, even compared to pre-pandemic levels. That's not good. Some researchers have estimated the pandemic will only have decreased the estimated rise in temperatures by 0.01 degrees, which, while really positive, is tiny compared to the possible 1.5, 2, or even 3 degree increases in global temperatures that we're predicting.
Tasmania. I've had an excellent question from Peregrine School, grades 7 to 10. Essentially, the question is, I'm 13, in what way is the world going to change around me as I grow up into the future due to climate change? And what actions can I take? Now that's an excellent question. To answer this question, let's do a little bit of a thought experiment. Imagine yourself in 60 years' time. Will you have a family? What sort of housing will you live in? Will you still live in Tasmania? What will the world be like then? That's a long way to look forwards, and sometimes it's really hard to imagine the future. This is me when I was 12, roughly the same age that you are now. Can you pick me out? Yep, that's me with the groovy glasses. So if you'd asked my 12-year-old self to imagine the future, to even imagine the job that I have now, I would have struggled a little bit. But it would be good to get some clues or some tips from my future self to understand what lies ahead. So let's have a go at doing that now. We know that there are going to be some fairly severe impacts from climate change, including in Tasmania, and many of us are already seeing these impacts in our daily lives now. This includes water shortages, increased bushfires, severe weather events like thunderstorms and dust storms, new diseases showing up in Australia. For example, malaria is expected to potentially affect the northern part of Australia. Severe flooding and even infrastructure like railway lines being buckled in severe heat events. So when I was your age, when I was 12, people still smoked on aircraft. Can you believe that? Smoking on aircraft. And importantly, we had major environmental problems when I was growing up that really worried me. Acid rain was a big problem, and there was a huge hole in the ozone layer. Both of those environmental issues are now being managed very well. So my point is, as we begin to think about what the future is that lies ahead of us and ahead of you, it has enormous opportunities as well as some issues that we'll have to be very clever with how we manage them. Our cities are more likely to be greener. We might be using resource recovery, for example, taking sewage and converting that into power, electricity, but also gas for cooking. And ultimately, we may be able to have our cities give back to the environment, what we call net positive development in planning. So thank you, Peregrine School, grades 7 to 10, for this excellent question. There are some challenges that lie ahead of us, and especially that lie ahead of you as you go from 13 to, say, 63. You'll see some big changes in your lifetimes, but also there are incredible opportunities.
All the experts felt that it was really important to answer young people's questions about climate change. Why? Lots of reasons, but mainly because climate change is something that younger generations will have to deal with for their whole lives. Dr. Philippa McCormack, who's an expert in climate adaptation law, told us why she wanted to answer students' questions.
I'm Philippa, and I have my own kid who has questions that are big and complicated and important. And I know from her that when kids get to ask the questions that are rattling around in their brains, and if grown-ups take those questions seriously and give them a proper, thoughtful answer, then young people and kids get the chance to apply their clever, creative brains to the issues that they care about the most. I'm really excited to see where our young people take this curious climate project. And I want to be part of the world that they make as they grow and learn.
So why are we thinking about this right now? Well, as we speak, the world's leaders are meeting in Glasgow for the United Nations COP26 Climate Summit. This is a meeting where all the countries of the world discuss targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions with the aim of trying to limit climate change to less than 2 degrees Celsius of warming. They've also pledged to do everything possible to keep climate change to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, considered a safer level of warming. We'll find out what they managed to agree in the next 2 weeks.
There's really no other issue that our politicians deal with that poses real existential threat to the future of our planet. Think about that for a moment. This is the one issue, more than species extinction, more than other forms of pollution, more than pretty much any other environmental issue. This is the thing that could actually end life on Earth. And that is a mind-bogglingly profound burden to place on decision makers today to take action. The other reason why I think it should be a political priority is because it has such significant justice and equity dimensions for future generations. This is a situation where only if we take action and take a little bit of pain now will we spare future generations the pain that we're inflicting as a consequence of climate change. That makes it a very difficult political question, but it highlights just how important it is.
Learning about climate change can make you feel all kinds of emotions, and these are something that climate change experts also struggle with sometimes. Feelings can be a signal that something's wrong or needs our attention, and they can also be really motivating. They can help us find out what we're passionate about. Our feelings can help us learn how to take care of ourselves, others, and our planet. You might find it useful to talk to other people who have similar thoughts and feelings about climate change. And you can even find ways to help each other work for a safer climate.
Ultimately, climate change is a global issue that we need governments, businesses, and industries all over the world to work together to address. But each one of us can make a difference too. We can help by taking individual action, working together to take collective action, and by calling for larger scale systemic change, for example, by governments and world leaders. Small actions can add up to big changes and positive impacts. And it actually feels good when we're doing something constructive, working together with others that care about the same things as we do, and actively being part of the solution.
By working together, we can combine our efforts and influence to achieve change and progress faster. Find your tribe and use your voices. Get together with friends and other students who care about climate action.
And use your talents. Are you a great artist? Then draw or paint about climate action. Are you good with social media? Well, then you can use your influence to get climate action happening. Do you like to cook? Well, then perhaps offer to make a delicious vegetarian meal for your family.
Lastly, we probably can't all do all the possible actions against climate change all the time. Just remember that that's okay, because what we really need is lots of people doing lots of things lots of the time to try to help together. Remind yourself and other people to feel really good about whatever changes and actions that you're taking. Go you!
My name is Kim Beasy and I work at the School of Education in the University of Tasmania, and I've been a part of the Curious Climate Schools project, and I must say I'm so excited that this resource has been put together and will be available for our Tasmanian teachers to share with their students in classrooms. So you'll find authentic questions that have been submitted by young people from grade 5 all the way through to grade 10, asking their questions about climate change, which behind the scenes we've been organising and have organised experts to respond to these questions, which are now available in video or written form. It's just such a great resource to integrate into classrooms, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we do.
Head over to curiousclimate.org.au/schools to find out lots more about climate change and what we can all do about it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that very special video and that it's inspired you to think of some questions for Chloe and Gabi. So what we're going to do now is have our usual 5-minute break, and we'd love you to come up with some questions that we can pose to Chloe and Gabi today. When you're putting your questions in the chat function, don't forget to put your first name and the grade and the school that you're from. That would be wonderful. So we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Well, I can see that you've all been extremely busy and you've come up with some wonderful questions. We've just been having a look at the chat screen while you've been on the 5-minute break, and we've got questions that are ranging for a lot of topics, haven't we? From volcanoes to tsunamis to all sorts of things. So shall we make a start? And we'll see how best we can answer them. Let's start with Max from Mount Nelson Primary School. He's in grade 6. Are humans likely to die out before the sun?
Whoa, that's a big question.
It's a big question to start off with, isn't it?
It's a big question. So the sun is very stable at the moment, and it is likely to go on for billions and billions of years. And this is not my expertise, I'm a social scientist, but I'm pretty sure that the sun will outlast all of the life that's currently on Earth, and that will be billions of years in the future. So yeah, humans have been around for a few million years, and we're likely to be around for a few more million years, but probably not quite as long as the sun.
Michael from Year 4 at St Joseph's in Rosebury. Why don't we make more solar, wind and hydropower?
Michael, thank you. That's a great question. Well, we can and we should and we are in answer to that. So we're particularly lucky here in Tasmania that we have a lot of hydropower that produces the great bulk of our energy in an almost emissions-free way. At the moment, we are really ramping up in Australia and internationally our use of renewable energy like solar and like wind, as you mentioned. Solar panels, 1 in 4 houses in Australia now have solar panels, and that's increasing year on year. And wind power onshore as well as offshore, built in the ocean, are all forms of power that are really increasing in uptake, and they will become the kinds of solutions that we need to increasingly see in order to what's called decarbonise our economy, that is to get rid of using fossil fuels and to power our economies on and our lives on green emissions-free fuels. So fuels that don't contribute to climate change, sources of energy that don't contribute to climate change. So yes, more wind, more solar, and the hydro that we have where we have it, that we can use it in the best possible way, and also save energy. Don't use too much of it. That's always
turn the lights off.
That's right.
You're not in the room,
for
example.
As we all remind our kids. There's also a great answer on Curious Climate Schools from Evan Franklin about what would happen if we stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow. If we turn them all off, how much would we have enough electricity? And he's got some great answers about that if you go and look on the website.
Here's another question from Mount Nelson Primary School, grade 6. If the climate keeps changing, do you know how long before the North and South Pole will evaporate? And that's from Sam.
Now, we had some answers about this. It's a very good question, Sam. We had some answers about this from Professor Matt King on the website. And I know that it's... there was I'm trying to remember what he said, but I do remember what he said was that there are 2.5 billion litres of water. No, hang on, 2.5 million. Now I can't remember. Anyway, a massive amount of water in the North and South Poles, which could melt and go into the ocean. And if that did all melt, then it would raise the sea level by something like 60 metres, which would be like up to the top of West Point if that happened. But that's not going to happen. And it would take a long, long time. It would take more than any of our lifetimes. And really what he says in his answers is what we need to do is to stop emitting so much carbon dioxide so that we can really limit the amount of sea level rise that's happening. We can limit the amount that the Antarctic ice sheet and the Greenland ice sheet are melting, so that we can keep that sea level rise to a manageable amount, something that we can actually deal with without all of our cities on coasts going underwater.
Gabi, maybe one for you here. This is from Ollie, Year 5 at Rosebury. Why do some scientists think climate change isn't real?
That's a good question, Ollie. Thank you for that. Well, the truth is actually all scientists who are credible, peer-reviewed, that means publishing in reputable science journals, so all credible scientists now actually do agree that climate change is real. There was a piece of work that came out, a piece of research that came out just about a week ago that showed that 99.9+% of scientists believe that climate change is happening now and that it's caused by humans. So I think that the case is closed on whether climate change is anthropogenic, which means made by humans, or not. And the answer is yes, that it is, and climate change is real and it's here and it's happening now. So hopefully that answers your question, Ollie.
Before we go on with our questions, I thought we might just share the web address for Curious Climate Schools. Do you have that off the top of your head?
Well, we are curiousclimateschools.org.
No, we're not.
Sorry. Thank you. curiousclimate.org.au/schools.
Schools.
So go and have a look at that when we finish this session, and there are plenty of answers to all sorts of questions.
Lots of answers to some of the out there questions that we might get. Here is another question. This one is from from Harry and Nathan at grade 5 at Howrah Primary School. How much do you think the sea level could rise in Tasmania in, say, the next 50 years if we remain on the rate we are going?
We had an answer about that kind of thing from Karen Palmer, if you would like to have a look at her answer on the Curious Climate Schools website. I actually visited Howrah Primary last year to talk about climate change, so great to hear from you, Nathan and Harry. In the next 50 years, it's really the crunch time at the moment. It depends on what we do. So if we have a really high emissions of carbon dioxide like we have at the moment, we could be looking at a lot of rise, and I don't want to give a number because I can't quite remember. But we have the opportunity now to limit the amount of melting ice and the amount of sea level rise. And so it really depends on the kinds of things that our politicians decide when they go to the meetings like the COP26 meeting that's happening at the moment in Glasgow. So at the moment, all the world leaders are there, and this is the kind of thing that they are talking about. So there are also governments like Palau and all of the Pacific Island nations there who are saying, well, if we don't limit these things now, then our nations are going to go underwater. And the same thing will happen to parts of Tasmania, low-level parts of Tasmania, places like Cremorne, some parts of Kingston, South Arm. There are places that that could go underwater. We could have a few more islands where we've got peninsulas at the moment. So that is a risk, but it's something that we can address now and stop happening.
Okay, here is one from Lada at Mount Nelson Primary. Are nuclear power plants good for the environment? Lada is in grade 6.
Lada, I can answer that question for you, and it's a really good one. And actually, we've been seeing quite a lot of conversation in the media recently, just in the last couple of weeks, about nuclear power. Well, here are a couple of answers for you. Currently in Australia, nuclear power is prohibited by law. So the development of nuclear power plants, enrichment of uranium, which is the fuel that's needed for nuclear power, that's all against the law in Australia. We have really huge reserves of uranium, that mineral that's needed to develop nuclear power here in this country. In fact, we supply a third of the world's total supply of uranium. So people are asking questions about whether this is something that could be developed for Australia. Now, in those countries that already are using some degree of nuclear power, yes, that can help limit emissions of carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels. So potentially that does mitigate climate change somewhat. But if we were to think about developing nuclear power for Australia, what might the problems be right now? And would that be a feasible way to decarbonise our energy system? Well, apart from the fact that we'd have to change the law to do that, there are a few things to consider. So it actually takes a very long time to develop a nuclear industry. Even if we decided to do it today, it could take from 10 to 12 or even a few years longer than that to develop and have nuclear power running. So that would take us to 2030 something, mid-2030s perhaps. So that's a pretty slow way of decarbonising, or providing an alternative source of energy to fossil fuels. The second thing is, by that date, so by mid-2030s, the cost of renewables will be so much cheaper. So when I say renewables, I mean mainly wind and solar, will be so much cheaper than the cost of nuclear. So for Australia, it doesn't currently make sense to get into nuclear. It's against the law. It'll be too expensive by the time it comes online. And so it's not really a feasible alternative. But in those countries that already have it, that may be something that they turn to increasingly so.
Now, here's a big question for both of you. This is from Michael, Year 4 in Rosebury. What can we do to stop climate change? So many things. We said at the same time, so many things. What are some of the things we can do?
Well, I think we need to remember that this is a really big issue that we need governments to be dealing with. It's not, we can't just expect individuals to be able to make a difference, but to make enough of a difference. But we can all make a bit of a difference, and the more that we work together on this, the more of a difference we can make. So that's the first thing. There are lots of things that everyone can do in their own lives. So things like riding your bike to school, or walking to school, or taking the bus, that can help, particularly if all of you do it together. You got another one?
I have. Well, let's talk about some things you can do in your own lives, and then some of the larger changes we need to see. So one of the things we can do in our own lives, and it's a big thing, is eating less meat and dairy products, because they that combined, the meat and dairy industry contributes a huge amount of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, and methane from the burping cows, and so on. So if we reduce our consumption of those foodstuffs, we can certainly make a difference towards climate change. But I think, as you were saying, Chloe, it's not just individuals that need to make change. It is communities, governments, and global systems that need to change as well. So
we can also have an impact on that. So with it, if you think about your school, for example, maybe you could work together and your school could come up with a plan for how you could reduce your carbon emissions. It might be about you need more insulation. It might be about the settings that you have the air conditioners on, or whether you can open windows or close windows to save energy, depending on whether you've got your air conditioners on or off. Things like that. So if you would like to do something about climate change, maybe you need a school composting system. So there are things that you can talk to your teachers about, and maybe get together a kind of a student representative council on climate change, that you can make a school plan. And at a slightly bigger level, we need to do that with our local government. So you could talk to your local government representatives. If you're living in a town or a city in Tasmania, go and see your local politicians and ask them what they're doing and how you can be involved.
That's a big question, isn't it? There are lots of different things we can do.
Yes.
Turn off the lights. Okay, now here is a question that I wanted to ask you about the project, because we were talking about it earlier. What were some of the most asked questions that young people had for you?
Well, there's a huge range of questions. One of the key ones was whether it's reversible, so whether climate change, whether the issues that we're seeing now, the impacts from climate change, can be reversed, and whether it's too late to do that.
So that was that was a really popular question.
That was the most asked. Yeah. Those two questions were the most asked questions. Yeah.
And what's the answer?
It's not too late to make the changes that we need to see, and that's why world leaders are meeting right now at the COP26 conference in Glasgow. They know that this is a last-minute effort that we need to put in. We know that really to make the changes that will stop climate change getting away with us, and stop humans being able to pull back the most extreme impacts of climate change, and to be able to reduce it, that we need to make that effort to do that this decade. And so that's why we're seeing this huge push now for that to happen. So it's not too late. Some impacts will be irreversible. Even, for example, even if we stopped burning all fossil fuels and stopped all greenhouse gases entering the atmosphere right now, today, sea level rise will continue into the future, even for centuries. Sea level rise will continue, because so much of the heat that's been trapped in the atmosphere due to increased greenhouse gases is absorbed into the ocean, and the ocean will slowly release that heat. So some impacts will be irreversible. We will see change no matter what we do on climate change in this decade.
Chloe, did you have another question that came up time and time again that you'd like to share?
Well, the other big question was what is climate change and what causes climate change? Yeah. And I mean, that's a very important question to ask, and something that really increases your climate literacy if you understand the answer to that. So we do have quite a few answers from climate scientists on our website, and also some answers around how climate scientists actually find out about this kind of thing. So the answer to that question is that climate change is caused by greenhouse gases. And what happens in the if you just had the Earth without an atmosphere, it would be like a rock. We wouldn't be able to have any kind of life on Earth. But what the atmosphere does is it creates a blanket around the Earth, and the sun's rays can get in and then are trapped inside the blanket between the Earth and the top of the atmosphere. And so we have greenhouse gases that help to create that. But what we're doing is we're putting too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. By burning fossil fuels, we're changing the balance there. So we're getting too much carbon dioxide that the Earth can't cope with. And so the sun's rays can come in, but they can't get out again. And that means that the whole of the Earth system is warming up. And the heat is going in, not just into the atmosphere, but into the oceans and onto land, and being soaked up. And that's creating a whole load of extra energy in the system, which creates then extreme weather events and lots of other knock-on effects.
Oh, so I didn't mean to interrupt you then, Chloe. Sorry, it was just that as you were talking about that, Ewan from Year 5 at Howrah Primary actually asked, how do fossil fuels actually cause climate change? So that was a very timely question and answer that just came in from Ewan. And I guess just to close off with one of the things or two things that I've been very interested in are packaging and what we can do to try to reduce packaging, or to get food manufacturers, for example, to try to come up with different ways to package up all the products that we buy in supermarkets. And if you live in Hobart or in the Hobart City Council area and you get takeaway food now, you'll see that the council has banned plastic takeaway containers, and everyone has to use recycled containers now, which is fantastic. So we don't see those little soy sauce fish containers so much anymore. And the other thing that I'm also interested in is the impact of the clothing industry, clothing and textiles and fast fashion, because of course that has had that has a really detrimental impact on the planet as well. So I think if we think about the clothes that we wear and all of the products that we buy as well, we can make some small steps there too, can't we? If we try and cut down on plastic packaging and those sorts of things.
That's right.
Was that some questions that came in from young people about how they personally can sort of reduce that sort of impact?
Definitely. There were questions about that, and there were questions about plastics specifically. And I think just to finish off is that everything is interconnected. Our consumption, the way we live on the planet, and the way our economies are set up to encourage us to consume and to want more all the time. All those things are interconnected with the problems that we're seeing with the climate. But we can all be the solution, start to be some of the solution at least, by reducing what we consume and our impact on the planet, and thinking about treading more lightly.
Yes, yes, and this sort of project is really so important because it's about being aware of the problem and then thinking and learning about ways that we can help and that we can get governments and policymakers to help as well. Well, Gabi and Chloe, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for coming on UCTV Alive for Kids. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who asked questions.
Yes, thanks.
Well, everybody, I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. Certainly a lot to think about and so many things that you can do and that you and your school can do as well. Now, don't forget to visit our UCTV page on the Underwood Centre website, where you can catch up on past episodes of Alive for Kids, and you can also register for new episodes. That's all we've got time for this time, so we'll see you soon. Bye.